The room smells like stale incense and wet stone. It's 1400 BC, somewhere in a pitch-black chamber cut into a limestone wall in Thebes. The heat is so thick in there it feels like breathing through a wool blanket. You're not looking at stars. You're not looking at a sundial. You're staring at a heavy alabaster jar, listening to one sound, over and over. Drip, drip, drip. A little hole at the bottom lets water bleed out, drop by drop, sliding past 12 lines someone carved into the inside wall by hand. You don't have a watch. Nobody's phone is buzzing in a pocket that doesn't exist yet. No little red dot telling you you're late for something. There's just a dark room, a leaking jar, and the slow, cold realization that somebody, somewhere, figured out how to cut the whole seamless mess of existence into tiny, countable pieces. That's the actual story of how humans found time. And it doesn't start with peaceful stargazers or farmers just wanting to know when to plant corn. That's the tidy version they hand you in school. The real version is dirtier. Time wasn't discovered so much as it was mined, weaponized, and sold back to us as a system of control, fraud, and forced labor. It's a setup, and it was rigged from day one. Everyone walks around with the same lazy assumption baked into their head, that timekeeping was some natural evolution of curiosity, that we looked up at the moon, felt something poetic, and decided to get organized. That's not what happened. The itch to trap the day inside a grid didn't come from wonder. It came from greed. So what actually went down in the dark? Who used the minutes to grab power? And why should you care? Sitting there right now with a glowing rectangle in your hand that runs every second of your day. We start with those Egyptian water clocks, the clepsydras. The public didn't get anywhere near them. Temple priests kept them locked up, guarded, almost sacred. Why bother hiding a bucket with a hole in it? Because whoever controls how the day gets measured controls the economy underneath it. Priests used those dripping jars to time shifts for temple laborers, sure. But the real money move was taxing water rights along the Nile. Farmers needed river water for their crops, and instead of measuring the actual water taken, priests measured it in drips off the temple clock. Clock runs a little faster that week. You now owe more silver for less water, and there's no way to prove otherwise because you don't own a clock. They do. Time wasn't some cosmic truth handed down from the heavens. It was a tax bracket with a religious paint job. Let that sit for a second. It gets worse before it gets useful. Jump forward to Rome, a few centuries before Christ. The calendar back then was a total circus. A guy called the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, was supposed to keep the year aligned with the actual seasons by adding an extra month here and there when needed. Sounds reasonable. Except the job had nothing to do with astronomy and everything to do with political leverage. If the Pontifex's buddies were in office, he'd casually toss in a few extra weeks, sometimes a whole bonus month to stretch out their term. If his rivals were running things, he'd shave the year down, cutting their time short and scrambling their tax collection before they even knew what hit them. Roman merchants genuinely lost track of what month it was because the calendar kept getting rigged behind closed doors. It wasn't a measurement of time. It was a shell game, played with the days of people's actual lives. Money, power, timing, which is completely wild when you sit with it. Then things get colder in medieval Europe, around the 1200s, inside Benedictine monasteries. The monks running these places had one core belief. Humans are lazy by nature and need to be forced into line. So they built the first mechanical, weight-driven clocks, not for science, not for progress, for compliance. The mechanism would trip a hammer. The hammer would slam into a massive iron bell, and that sound would rip across the whole town, dragging monks out of bed in the pitch black for prayer. Miss the bell, and you weren't getting a warning. You were getting isolation, cut rations, sometimes both. The machine had officially taken over the human body's natural rhythm. It didn't ask when you were tired. It told you when you were required to be awake. Quotas, control, compliance dressed up as devotion. Here's the detail that barely makes it into the textbooks. Before all this mechanical obsession, hours weren't even equal. A daylight hour in ancient and medieval systems stretched or shrank depending on the season. Summer daylight hour, longer. Winter daylight hour, shorter. Sounds like a small technical footnote until you realize labor and wage arrangements were built around hours worked. An employer, a temple, a landowner, whoever controlled the definition of the hour controlled how much labor they were legally owed for the same wage. The hour wasn't fixed until the machine made it fixed, and the machine was built by the people who benefited from fixing it their way. Now here's where this stops being ancient history trivia and starts sounding uncomfortably familiar. Picture a modern casino floor, any major one, Vegas, Macau, doesn't matter. Walk in and notice something immediately. No windows, no clocks anywhere. That's not an accident of interior design. That's an engineered decision. Casino architects use a real metric called time on device, and their entire job is maximizing it. They erase the natural arc of the sun completely and replace it with blinking lights, looping electronic chimes, small dopamine hits stacked one after another, so your brain loses its grip on how long you've actually been sitting there. That is the exact same psychological architecture the Egyptian priests were running with a jar of dripping water 3,000 years earlier. Cut a person off from the organic flow of the earth, trap them inside an artificial loop instead, and their brain gets disoriented just enough to become easy to extract value from. Gold in a temple bucket, labor in a monastery, chips on a felt table, or attention on a feed that never stops refreshing. We didn't invent the digital time trap in Silicon Valley. We just shrunk the monastery bell down to the size of a rectangle, put it in your pocket, and coated it in dopamine instead of guilt. And here's the part of this whole thing that actually stings. We build monuments to the men who formalized the grid. Statues, textbook chapters, whole museum wings dedicated to the inventors of the pendulum clock, the quartz crystal, the atomic clock. History treats them like they dragged order out of chaos and handed it to humanity as a gift. Meanwhile, somewhere in a brutal Roman stone quarry 2,000 years back, there's an unnamed slave getting whipped because the Pontifex Maximus decided, on a political whim, that the hour was shorter that day. That slave lived through the actual physical friction of an invented system, felt it in his back, in his hands, in his sleep. His masters, meanwhile, sat comfortably in the shade, adjusting the calendar to squeeze out a little more profit before the next election cycle. Same invention, same day, two completely different fates, decided entirely by who happened to own the clock. So next time your phone buzzes, or you feel that tiny stomach drop of panic because you're 4 minutes late logging into a call nobody even wanted to be on, go back to that limestone room in Thebes. Go back to the sound of water dripping in total darkness. You're running your entire life on a system our species spent thousands of years engineering for one purpose: extracting taxes, faking political miracles, and forcing bodies to work against their own natural rhythm. It was never a clean line of human progress marching confidently toward the future. It's just us, generation after generation, locking ourselves into a cage built out of minutes, until eventually we forgot we were the ones who forged the key in the first place. So here's the honest question. If you could erase the clock completely, right now, and go back to living strictly off the sun and the seasons, no apps, no scheduling, no grid holding your day together, would you actually do it? Or have we been inside this machine so long that stepping outside of it isn't even survivable anymore? Tell me in the comments. I actually want to know.